The 3 styles of attachment. It's been almost a year since Brenda and Bob's 9-month-old daughter tragically died in her sleep. As Bob sits reading the newspaper, Brenda comes in holding some photographs, her eyes red. She's been crying. Brenda tells him she's found some photos from a day they took their baby to the beach. Bob, not even looking up, mutters, "Yeah." "She's wearing that hat your mother bought for her," Brenda begins. Bob mumbles, still not looking, clearly uninterested. When Brenda asks if he wants to see the pictures, he just says no, brusquely turning the page of the newspaper, then scanning it aimlessly. As Brenda watches him in silence, tears run down her face. She blurts out, "I don't understand you. She was our baby. Don't you miss her? Don't you care?" "Of course I miss her. I just don't want to talk about it," Bob growls as he storms out of the room. That poignant exchange illustrates how differences in attachment styles can put a couple out of sync in dealing not only with a shared trauma, but with virtually everything else. Brenda wants to talk about her feelings. Bob avoids them. She sees him as cold and uncaring. He sees her as intrusive and demanding. The more she tries to get him to talk about how he feels, the more he withdraws. This demand-withdraw pattern has long been commented on by marital therapists, to whom such couples sometimes turn to help resolve their deadlock. But new findings suggest that this classic discrepancy has a brain basis. Neither way is best. Rather, both tendencies reflect underlying neural patterns. Our childhood leaves its stamp on our adult ardor nowhere more clearly than in our attachment system, the neural networks that operate whenever we relate to people who matter the most to us. As we have seen, children who are well nurtured and feel their caretakers empathize with them become secure in their attachments, neither overly clingy nor pushing away. But those whose parents neglect their feelings and who feel ignored become avoidant, as though they have given up hope of achieving a caring connection. And children whose parents are ambivalent, unpredictably flipping from rage to tenderness, become anxious and insecure. Bob embodies the avoidant type. He finds intense emotions unpleasant and so tries to minimize them. Brenda is an anxious type, whose feelings bubble up irrepressibly and who needs to talk over her preoccupations. Then there's the secure type, comfortable with emotions but not preoccupied by them. Had Bob been secure, presumably he could have been emotionally available to Brenda as she needed. If Brenda had been the secure one, she would not have been so desperate for Bob's attentive empathy. Once it is formed in childhood, the way we attach ourselves stays remarkably constant. These distinct attachment styles emerge to some degree in every close relationship, and nowhere so strongly as in our romantic ties. Each has marked consequences for a person's relationship life, according to a series of studies by Philip Shaver, the psychologist at the University of California, who has led much of the research on attachment and relationships. Shaver carries the mantle passed down from John Bowlby to his American disciple Mary Ainsworth, whose pioneering studies of how 9-month-olds reacted to a brief separation from their mothers first identified some infants as secure in their attachment and others as insecure in various ways. Shaver, taking Ainsworth's insight to the world of adult relationships, has identified those attachment styles as they show up in any close connection, whether it's a friendship, a marriage, or a parent-child relationship. Shaver's group finds that 55% of Americans, whether as infants, children, or adults, fall into the secure category, easily getting close to others and being comfortable depending on them. Secure people come to a romantic relationship expecting that a partner will be emotionally available and attuned, that their partner will be there for support in times of hardship or distress, just as they can be for their partner. They feel an ease in getting close to people. Securely attached people see themselves as worthy of concern, care, and affection, and others as accessible, reliable, and having good intentions toward them. As a result, their relationships tend to be intimate and trusting. In contrast, about 20% of adults are anxious in their love relationships, prone to fret that their partner does not really love them or won't stay with them. Sometimes their apprehensive clinging and need for reassurance can inadvertently drive a partner away. These adults tend to see themselves as being unworthy of love and care, though they incline toward idealizing their romantic partners. Once they form a relationship, Anxious types can readily be beset by fears that they will be left or found wanting in some way. They are prone to all the signs of love addiction, obsessive preoccupation, self-conscious anxiety, and emotional dependence. Often angst-ridden, they are beset by relationship worries of all kinds, such as about being abandoned by their partner, or they are hypervigilant and jealous about imagined dalliances, and they often bring the same set of overconcern to their friendships. About 25% of adults are avoidant, uncomfortable being emotionally close, finding it hard to trust a partner or share feelings, and getting nervous when their partner seeks to get more emotionally intimate. They tend to suppress their own emotions, and especially to stifle their distressing feelings. Because avoidant people expect a partner to be emotionally untrustworthy, they find intimate relationships difficult. The underlying difficulty with the anxious and avoidant types comes down to rigidity. Both represent strategies that actually make sense in a specific situation, but are adhered to even where they fail. If there is a real danger, for example, anxiety arouses preparedness, but anxiety out of place creates relationship static. When people are distressed, those of each type typically follow a different strategy for calming themselves. Anxious people, like Brenda, turn to other people, depending on the power of soothing interactions. Avoidant people, like her husband Bob, remain stridently independent, preferring to manage their upsets on their own. Secure romantic partners seem able to buffer the perturbations of an anxious partner so that the relationship does not rock too much. If one partner in a couple has the secure pattern, they have relatively few conflicts and crises. But when both partners in a couple are anxious, they are understandably prone to flare-ups and tiffs and demand constant high maintenance. Apprehension, resentment, and distress, after all, are contagious. The neural basis. Each of the three styles reflects a specific variation in the wiring of the brain's attachment system, as research by Shaver with neuroscientists at the University of California at Davis reveals. These differences surface most boldly in disturbing moments, such as in an argument, or when one is lost in fearful ruminations about such an argument, or even worse, when one is obsessing about breaking up with a romantic partner. During such distressing reveries, fMRI testing showed a distinct brain pattern emerges with each of the three main attachment styles. Though the study used only women, presumably the same conclusions apply to men. Only future studies will tell. The propensity of the anxious types to overworry, as when one fears losing a partner, lit up low road zones including the anterior temporal pole, or ATP, which activates during sadness, the anterior cingulate, where emotions flare, and the hippocampus, a key site for memory. This neural activity was specific to anxiety about relationships rather than fears in general. Tellingly, the anxious women could not shut down this circuit for relationship disquiet even when they were specifically trying to. Their obsessive worries overpowered their brain's ability to turn them off, but their anxiety-calming circuits worked perfectly well for shutting off other kinds of worries. In contrast, the secure women had no trouble shutting off fears about breaking up. Their sadness-generating ATP quieted down as soon as they turned their attention to other thoughts. The key difference? The secure women readily activated the OFC's neural switch for calming distress from the ATP. By the same token, the anxious women could bring to mind some particular worry-provoking moment from their romantic relationship far more easily than could the other women. Their readiness for preoccupation with relationship troubles, Shaver suggests, could well interfere with their ability to figure out what would be most constructive for them to do. Avoidant women had a very different neural story. The crucial action hinged on an area in the cingulate that activates during suppression of upsetting thoughts. In these women, this neural brake on emotion seems jammed. Just as the anxious women were unable to stop their worry, the avoidant women were unable to stop their suppression of worry, even when they were asked to. By contrast, the other women had no trouble flipping on and off the cingulate when they were asked to think about something sad, and then to stop thinking about it. This neural pattern for nonstop suppression explains why those with the avoidant style tend to be emotionally distant and uninvolved with life. When a relationship breaks up or someone dies, they do little grieving and they feel emotionally unengaged during social interactions. Some degree of anxiety seems to be a price we pay for true emotional intimacy, if only because it surfaces relationship problems that need to be resolved. Shaver's avoidant types seem to have bartered away a fuller emotional connection with others for a protective disconnection from their own disturbing feelings. Tellingly, Shaver found it hardest to recruit avoidant women for this study because one of the requirements was involvement in a serious long-term romantic relationship, and so few were. These styles, remember, are largely shaped in childhood, and so they do not seem genetic givens. If they were learned, then they should be modifiable to some extent by the right experience, whether in psychotherapy or in a reparative relationship. On the other hand, an understanding partner may simply be able to accommodate to these quirks, within limits. We can think of the neural systems for attachment, sex, and caregiving as parts of one of those kinetic mobiles of Alexander Calder, where motion in any branch reverberates to the others. For example, attachment styles mold a person's sexuality. Avoidant types have more sexual partners and one-night stands than do anxious or secure people. True to their preference for emotional distance, avoidants are content with sex without caring or intimacy. Should they somehow end up in an ongoing relationship, they tend to oscillate between distance and coercion, and so they are understandably more likely to divorce or to break up, and then, oddly, to try to return to that same partner. The challenges to a love match posed by attachment styles merely begin the saga. Then there's sex. Chapter 14. Desire, His and Hers. One of my best friends during my freshman year in college was a brilliant, bearish rugby player we nicknamed the Hulk. To this day, I recall the advice he told me his German-born father had given him as he was preparing to leave home. The maxim had a Brechtian, wryly cynical flavor. Roughly translated from the German, it went, "When the penis gets hard, the brain goes soft." Put more technically, the neural wiring for sex inhabits low-road subcortical regions that are beyond the reach of the thinking brain. As these nether circuits drive us with ever more urgency, we care less and less about whatever advice the high-road rational regions might offer us. In a more general sense, this wiring map accounts for the irrationality of so many romantic choices. Our logical circuitry has nothing to do with the matter. The social brain both loves and cares, but lust travels some of the lowest branches of the low road. Desire seems to come in two forms, his and hers. When couples in love gazed at photos of their partners, a brain imaging study revealed a telling difference. For men in love, but not for women, the centers for visual processing and sexual arousal lit up, showing how his lover's looks trigger a man's passion. Small wonder men worldwide seek out visual pornography, as one of the researchers notes, or that women tend to draw feelings of self-worth from their appearance and put so much energy into their looks, all the better to advertise their assets visually, as she puts it. But for women in love, looking at their beloved activates very different centers in the brain's social circuitry, cognitive centers for memory and attention. This difference suggests that women more thoughtfully weigh their feelings and assess a man as a prospective mate and provider. Women who are entering a romance notoriously tend to be more pragmatic than do men, and so, of necessity, they fall in love more slowly. Casual sex, for women, one researcher comments, is often not as casual as it is for men. After all, the brain's radar for attachment typically needs a series of meetings to make its decision about whether to commit. Men plunge down the low road while they are falling in love. To be sure, women cruise down the low, but they also circle back along the high. A more cynical view has it, men look for sex objects and women for success objects. But though women tend to find allure in signs of a man's power and wealth, and men in a woman's physical attractiveness, these are not the prime draws for either sex, just the ones they most differ on. For men and women alike, kindness tops the list. To further confuse our love life, circuits within the high road, whether through elevated sentiments or puritanical mores, resolutely strive to contain the red-hot subterranean currents of lust. Throughout history, cultures have applied high road brakes to low road urges. In Freud's terms, civilization has always battled its discontents. For instance, for centuries, marriages in European upper classes were simply a matter of landed families ensuring that their property would remain in a particular lineage. In essence, families married other families via arranged matches. Lust and love be damned, there was always adultery. Social historians tell us that, at least in Europe, only during the Reformation did today's romantic notion of a lusty, loving, and committed emotional bond between husband and wife emerge, a departure from the medieval ideal of chastity, which viewed marriage as a necessary evil. Not until around the Industrial Revolution and the rise of the middle class did the notion of romantic love become a popular enough Western ideal that simply falling in love was a respectable reason for a couple to marry. And of course, in cultures like India that hang at the cusp between tradition and modernity, those couples who marry for love alone are still a small minority, frequently encountering strong objections from their families who would prefer an arranged marriage. Then again, biology does not always cooperate with the modern ideal of marriage that combines lifetime companionship and caring with the more fickle delights of romantic ardor. Years of familiarity famously weaken desire, and sometimes that can happen as soon as a partner becomes a sure thing. To thicken the plot, nature has seen fit to endow men and women with different propensities even for the molecules of love. Men generally have higher levels of the chemicals that drive lust and lower levels of those that fuel attachment than do women. These biological mismatches create many of the classic tensions between men and women in the arena of passion. Culture and gender aside, perhaps the most fundamental dilemma for romantic love stems from the essential tension between the brain systems that underlie a secure sense of attachment and those that underlie caring and sex. Each of these neural networks fuels its own set of motives and needs, and these can either be in conflict or compatible. If they are at odds, then love will falter. If they are in harmony, love can flourish. Nature's cunning little trick. A woman writer, though independent and enterprising, always traveled with a pillowcase her husband had slept on. She'd slip it onto the hotel pillow wherever she went. Her explanation? Having his scent with her made it easier to fall asleep in a strange bed. That makes biological sense and offers a clue about one of nature's tricks in its drive to continue the species. The route taken in some of the very first stirrings of sexual attraction, or at least of interest, is low road, sensory rather than a formulated thought or even an emotion. For women, that initial subliminal intrigue can stem from an olfactory impression. For men, a visual one. Scientists have found that the scent of a man's perspiration can have remarkable effects on women's emotions, brightening their moods, relaxing them, and raising their levels of the luteinizing reproductive hormones that bring on ovulation. The study that suggests this, however, was done under starkly clinical and decidedly unromantic circumstances in a laboratory. Samples from the underarms of men who had not used deodorant for 4 weeks were blended into a concoction that was dabbed on the upper lip of young women who had volunteered for what they thought was a study of the scent of products like floor wax. When the scent was from a man's sweat rather than from some other source, the women felt more relaxed and happy. In a more romantic setting, researchers propose these odors may also stir sexual feelings. So, presumably, as couples dance, their hormonal hug quietly paves the way for sexual arousal, as their bodies subliminally orchestrate conditions conducive to reproduction. Indeed, the study was part of a search for new fertility therapies to see if the active ingredient in the perspiration could be isolated. The research was published in the journal Biology of Reproduction. The corollary for men may well be the impact of the sight of a woman's body on their brain's pleasure centers. The male brain contains seemingly hardwired signal detectors for key aspects of the female body, particularly the hourglass ratio of breast to waist to hips, a signal of youthful beauty that in itself can trigger sexual arousal in men. When men around the world rated the attractiveness of line drawings of women with varying ratios, most chose women with a waist circumference about 70% of her hips. Just why men's brains are so imprinted has been the topic of vigorous debate for decades. Some see in this bit of neural circuitry a way to make biological signs of a woman's peak fertility singularly alluring to men, thereby economizing on the placement of their sperm. Whatever the reason, these are elegant designs in human biology. The very sight of her delights him, and his scent readies her for love. That tactic no doubt worked well in early stages of human prehistory, but in modern life, the neurobiology of love has undergone complications. Libido's brain. Being truly, deeply, and madly in love was the one criterion for selecting men and women for a study at University College in London. The 17 who volunteered underwent brain imaging while looking at a photo of their romantic partner, then while looking at photos of friends. The conclusion? They seemed addicted to love. In men and women alike, the object of ardor, unlike the friends, elicited fireworks in uniquely linked sectors of the brain, circuitry so specific it appears specialized for romantic love. Much of that circuitry, as the neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp has proposed, lights up during another euphoric state, on cocaine or opiates. This finding suggests that the addictively ecstatic nature of intense romance has a neural rationale. Intriguingly, in men, none of this love circuitry does much during sexual arousal per se. Those areas adjacent to those for romance stir, suggesting an easy anatomical link when lust arises with love. Neuroscience, through such studies, has pierced the mystery of sexual passion, piecing together the mix of hormones and neurochemicals that give lust such spice. The recipe for desire varies a bit between the genders, to be sure, but the ingredients and their timing during the sexual act reveal an ingenious plan, one that adds the zing to propagating our species. Lust's circuitry, where libido stirs, covers a broad swath of the limbic brain. The sexes share much of this low-road wiring for sexual ardor, but with a few telling differences. These differences cause disparities in how each gender experiences lovemaking, as well as in how they value various aspects of a romantic encounter. For men, both sexuality and aggressiveness are lifted by the sex hormone testosterone acting in connected areas of the brain. When men become aroused sexually, their testosterone levels soar. The male hormone fuels a sexual itch in women as well, albeit not so strongly as in men. Then there's that addictive quality. For men and women alike, dopamine, the chemical that injects intense pleasure in activities as diverse as gambling and drug addictions, rockets during sexual encounters. Pleasurable dopamine levels rise not just during sexual arousal, but also with the frequency of intercourse and the intensity of a person's sex drive. Oxytocin, a chemical source of caregiving, permeates women's brains more than men's, and so it has more impact on women's sexual bonding. Vasopressin, a hormone closely related to oxytocin, can also play a role in bonding. Intriguingly, receptors for vasopressin are abundant in spindle cells, those superfast connectors of the social brain. The spindle cells are involved, for instance, when we make very rapid, intuitive judgments about someone we are meeting for the first time. While no studies can yet tell us for sure, these cells seem apt candidates for part of the brain system that creates love, or at least desire, at first sight. In the run-up to lovemaking, oxytocin levels soar in a man's brain, as does the hormonal hunger driven by arginine and vasopressin, known together as AVP. The male brain has more AVP receptors than does the female, most of them concentrated in the sexual circuitry. AVP, which becomes abundant at puberty, seems to fuel a man's sexual hankering, builds up as ejaculation nears, and rapidly declines at the moment of orgasm. In both men and women, oxytocin fuels many of the loving and delectable feelings of sexual contact. Ample doses released during orgasm, after which a flood of the chemical seems to stimulate the afterglow of warm affection and put men and women on the same tenderly loving hormonal wavelength for the time being. Oxytocin secretions remain strong after climax, particularly during afterplay, the cuddling that follows intercourse. Oxytocin wells up in particular strength in men during this refractory period after orgasm, when they typically cannot get an erection. Intriguingly, at least in rodents, and possibly in humans, abundant sexual gratification in males spikes a threefold rise in oxytocin levels, a brain change that apparently brings male brain chemistry closer to that of females for the time being. In any case, that clever chemical endgame for lovemaking affords a relaxed time to build attachment, another function of oxytocin. The lust circuitry also primes a couple for their next tryst. The hippocampus, the key structure in memory storage, holds neurons rich in receptors for AVP and oxytocin alike. AVP, particularly in a man, seems to imprint in memory with special strength the enticing image of his partner in passion, making his sexual mate singularly memorable. The oxytocin produced by orgasm also boosts memory, again imprinting in the mind's eye a lover's fond figure. While this primal biochemistry stirs our sexual activity, high-road brain centers exert their own influences, not always compatibly. Brain systems that for eons have worked well for human survival now seem vulnerable to conflicts and tensions that can make love's labor lost, not last. Ruthless desire. Consider a beautiful and independent young lawyer whose fiancée, a writer, worked at home. Whenever she came home, the fiancé would drop whatever he was doing and hover around her. One evening as she was coming to bed, he eagerly pulled her to him even before she had a chance to get under the sheets. "Just give me an ounce of space to love you from," she said to him, a comment that hurt his feelings. He threatened to go to sleep on the couch. Her comment bespeaks the underside of looping too tightly. It can be suffocating. The goal of attunement is not simply continual meshing, with an utter entrainment of every thought and feeling. It also includes giving each other space to be alone as needed. This cycle of connectedness strikes a balance between the individual's needs and the couple's. As one family therapist put it, the more a couple can be apart, the more they can be together. Each of love's major expressions, attachment, desire, and caring, has its unique biology, designed to loop partners together with its specific chemical glue. When they align, love grows robust. When they are at odds, love can flounder. Consider the challenge to any liaison when the three biological love systems misalign, as commonly happens in the tension between attachment and sex. This mismatch occurs, for example, when one partner feels insecure or, even worse, nurses outright jealousy or harbors fears of abandonment. From the neural perspective, the system for attachment, when pitched in the direction of anxiety, inhibits the operation of the others. Such gnawing apprehension can easily wither the sexual urge and snuff out affectionate caring, at least for a time. The fiancé's single-pointed fixation on the lawyer as a sexual object is akin to the ruthless desire of a nursing infant who knows nothing of his mother's own feelings and needs. These archaic desires play out too during lovemaking, when two passionate adults delve into each other's bodies with the fervor of infants. As we've noted, the childhood roots of intimacy resurface in the use of childlike, high-pitched voices or baby names between lovers. Ethologists argue that these cues trigger in lovers' brains parental responses of caregiving and tenderness. The difference between infant desire and adult, however, lies in the adult capacity for empathy, so that passion melds with compassion, or at least caring. So, Mark Epstein, the lawyer-psychiatrist, suggested an alternative for the fiancé. Slow down enough to attune emotionally, and thereby create the psychological space that would let her stay in touch with her own desire. That mutuality of desire and maintenance of the loop between them offered a way to bring back the passion she was losing. This harkens back to Freud's famous question, "What does woman want?" As Epstein answers, she wants a partner who cares what she wants. The consensual it. Anne Rice, author of a best-selling series of vampire novels and of erotica under a nom de plume, remembers having vivid sadomasochistic fantasies as far back as childhood. One of her earliest fantasies centered on elaborate scenarios of young men in ancient Greece being auctioned as sexual slaves. Same-sex attraction between males fascinated her. In adulthood, she found herself drawn to friendships with gay men and attracted to gay culture. Such is the stuff of which fiction is made. Rice's vampire novels, rife with homoerotic sub-themes, set the tone for the romantic universe of the Goths. And in her steamy novels written under a pseudonym, she details sadomasochistic activities by both sexes. While those sexual fantasies are by no means everyone's favorites, nothing in them is beyond what researchers find typifies the erotic daydreams of ordinary people. The flamboyant sexual scenes that Rice has elaborated in detail are not deviant in a normative sense. Rather, they are among the fantasy themes commonly reported by men and women alike in study after study. For example, one survey found that the most frequent sex fantasies include reliving an exciting sexual encounter, imagining having sex with one's partner or with someone else, having oral sex, making love in a romantic location, being irresistible, and being forced into sexual submission. A wide variety of sex fantasies can reflect a healthy sexuality, offering a font of stimulation that enhances arousal and pleasure. When both parties consent, this goes even for more bizarre fantasies like Rice's, which would seem on their face to present cruel scenarios. We've come a long way since Freud's proclamation a century ago that a happy person never fantasizes, only an unsatisfied one. But a fantasy is just that, vivid imagination. As Rice pointedly mentions, she has never acted on hers despite being presented with opportunities. Sexual fantasies may not be enacted with another person, but they nevertheless find their uses. Alfred Kinsey's original studies, which in retrospect represented a skewed sample, showed that 89% of men and 64% of women admitted to having sex fantasies during masturbation. A shocking finding in the more sedate era, the 1950s, but rather ho-hum today. As the good Professor Kinsey first made glaringly clear, a surprising range of sexual behaviors in men and women are far more common than are publicly admitted. The social taboos that reign even today, despite the Jerry Springer Show and the ubiquity of web porn sites, mean that the actual incidence of various predilections is invariably higher than people are willing to admit. Indeed, sex researchers routinely assume that any statistics that are based on people's own reports of their sexual behavior underrepresent actual numbers. When college men and women duly recorded in a diary every sexual fantasy or sexy thought they had over the course of a day, men reported about 7 daily, and women between 4 and 5. But in other studies where college students answered a questionnaire asking them to recall the same information, the men estimated they had just 1 sexual fantasy per day, the women 1 per week. Consider men and women who admit to having had sexual fantasies during intercourse. For virtually all forms of sexual behavior, men tend to have higher numbers than women, but fantasizing during intercourse seems to level the playing field. Up to 94% of women and 92% of men say that they have done so, though some reports range as low as 47% for men and 34% for women. One study found that having sex with one's current lover is a popular daydream while one is not engaged in lovemaking, but imagining sex with someone else is a more popular fantasy during intercourse. Such data have led one wag to observe that when romantic partners make love, there are in effect 4 people involved, the 2 actual ones and the 2 that exist in their minds. Most sex fantasies inherently depict the other as an object, a being created to fit the preferred ardor of the beholder, without regard to what the other himself or herself might want in that situation. But in the realm of fantasy, anything goes. Consenting to enter, share, and act out a sex fantasy in vivo is an act of convergence. Playing the script with a willing partner, rather than imposing the fantasy, and so making the other an it, makes all the difference. If partners both agree and so desire, even a seeming I-it scenario can create a closer sense of intimacy. Under the right circumstances, regarding a lover as an it, if mutually consensual, can be part of the play of sex. A good sexual relationship, one psychotherapist observes, is like a good sexual fantasy, exciting but safe. When partners have complementary emotional needs, he adds, the resulting chemistry, like fantasies that mesh, can breed an excitement that counters the usual downward drift in sexual interest among couples who have been together for many years. Empathy and understanding between partners makes all the difference between a playful it fantasy and a hurtful one. If both see the love play as a game, their very ease with the fantasy creates a reassuring empathy. As they enter the fantasy reality, their looping within it enhances their mutual pleasure and bespeaks a radical acceptance, an implicit act of caring. When sex objectifies. Consider the love life of a pathological narcissist from a case report by his psychotherapist. 25 and single, he easily becomes infatuated with women he meets and is obsessed by powerful fantasies about each one in turn. But after a series of sexual trysts with a lover, he always feels disappointed in her, suddenly finding her too dumb or clinging or physically repugnant. For instance, when he felt lonely at Christmas, he tried to persuade his girlfriend of the moment, whom he'd only been seeing a few weeks, to stay in town with him instead of visiting her family. When she refused, he attacked her as self-centered and, enraged, decided never to see her again. The narcissist's sense of entitlement endows him with the feeling that ordinary rules and boundaries do not apply to him. As we've seen, he feels entitled to sex if a woman encourages and arouses him, even if she clearly says she wants to stop. He will go ahead anyway, even if he has to use force. A blunted empathy, remember, stands high on the list of traits of the narcissist, along with an exploitative attitude and vain self-centeredness. So it should come as no surprise that narcissistic men endorse attitudes that favor sexual coercion, such as the idea that victims of rape are asking for it, or that when a woman says no to sex, she really means yes. The narcissists among American college men tend to agree that if a girl engages in necking or petting and she lets things get out of hand, it is her own fault if her partner forces sex on her. For some men, that belief explicitly rationalizes date rape, where the man coerces a woman who has been necking with him but wants to stop. The prevalence of such attitudes among some men may in part explain why, in the United States, around 20% of women claim to have been forced into unwanted sexual activity despite their resistance, most often by a spouse or partner or someone with whom they were in love at the time. Indeed, 10 times as many women are forced into sex by someone they love as by a stranger. A study of self-confessed date rapists found that every instance of such coercion followed mutually consensual sex play. The rapist simply ignored the woman's protests about going further. Unlike the majority of men, narcissists actually enjoy and find sexually arousing films in which a couple are petting, the woman wants to stop, and the man then forces sex on her despite her evident pain and disgust. While viewing such a scene, the narcissist tunes out of the woman's suffering and focuses only on the self-gratification of the aggressor. Intriguingly, narcissists in this study did not enjoy a sequence showing the rape alone, without the foreplay and refusal. Their lack of empathy makes narcissists indifferent to the suffering they cause their date. While she experiences the forced sex as a disgusting act of violence, he fails to understand, let alone have compassion for, her displeasure with the act. Indeed, the more empathic a man, the less likely he is to act as a sexual predator, or even imagine doing so. An additional hormonal force may be at work in coercive sex. Extremely high levels of testosterone, studies find, make men more likely to treat another person as merely a sexual object. It also makes them troubling marital partners. A study of testosterone levels among 4,462 American men found an alarming pattern among those with the very highest readings for the male hormone. They were more aggressive overall, more likely to have been arrested and been in fights. They were also bad risks as husbands. They were prone to hitting or throwing things at their wives, to having extramarital sex, and, understandably, to have divorced. The higher the testosterone, the worse the picture. On the other hand, the study notes many high testosterone men are happily married. What makes the difference, the authors propose, is the extent to which the men have learned to control their wilder testosterone-driven impulses. The prefrontal systems hold the keys to managing impulse of all kinds, sexual and aggressive alike. That gets us back to the need for the high road and its abilities to rein in the low as a counterweight to raw libido. Years ago, As a science journalist for the New York Times, I was talking to an FBI profiler who specialized in the psychological analysis of serial murderers. He told me that such murderers are almost invariably acting out perversely cruel sex fantasies, in which even the pleas of victims become fodder for arousal. Indeed, a, thankfully, tiny subset of men are sexually aroused by depictions of rape more than they are by erotic scenes of consensual sex. Their weird appetite for suffering sets this group of outliers apart from the vast majority of men. Not even the date-raping narcissists found outright rape a turn-on. Such utter lack of empathy seems to explain why serial rapists are undeterred by the tears or screams of their victims. A significant number of convicted rapists later report that during the rape, they felt nothing for their victim and simply did not know or care how she felt. Almost half convinced themselves she enjoyed it, despite the fact that she was upset enough that the rapists were now in jail. One study of men imprisoned for rape found that they could be effective at understanding other people in most situations, with one notable exception. They were inept at perceiving negative expressions in women, though not positive ones. So, while they have the capacity for empathy in general, these rapists seem unable or unwilling to read the signals that will stop them. Such predators may well be selectively insensitive, misreading the signals they least want to see, a woman's refusal or distress. Most troubling are the highly deviant men whose favored, compulsively acted-on fantasies center on I-it scenarios, a pattern typical of incarcerated sex offenders, particularly those convicted of serial rape, child molestation, and exhibitionism. These men typically are aroused by fantasies of these abusive acts far more than by more ordinary sexual scenes. Of course, merely having a fantasy by no means implies that someone will force sex on another to act it out. But those who, like sex offenders, actually inflict their fantasied acts on others have broken through the neural barrier between thought and action. Once the low road has breached the high road's barrier to acting out an abusive impulse, fantasies become fuel for malevolence, stoking the unbridled libido, some say lust for power, that drives repeated sex crimes. In such cases, those fantasies become a danger signal, particularly when the man lacks empathy for his victims, believes that the victims enjoy it, feels hostility towards his victims, and is emotionally lonely. That explosive combination almost ensures trouble. Contrast the cold disassociation of I-it sexuality with the connected warmth of an I-you tryst. Romantic love hinges on resonance. Without this intimate connection, lust alone remains. With full two-way empathy, one's partner is a subject as well, attuned to as a you, and the erotic charge increases dramatically. When a couple mingles in emotional union, along with physical intimacy, both lose their sense of separateness in what has been called an ego orgasm, a meeting not just of bodies, but of their very beings. Still, even the most skyrocketing orgasm offers no guarantee that lovers will genuinely care for each other the next morning. Caring operates via its own neural logic. Chapter 15. The Biology of Compassion. In a classic Rolling Stones song, Mick Jagger promises a lover, "I'll come to your emotional rescue," thus expressing a feeling held by romantic partners everywhere. It's not just the attraction that keeps a couple together, their mutual caretaking plays a role as well. Such emotional caring can operate in any relationship. A mother nursing her baby is the primal prototype for such nurturance. John Bowlby proposed that the same innate caregiving system springs into action whenever we have the urge to respond to a call for help, whether it is our lover, our child, our friend, or a stranger who is in distress. Caregiving between romantic partners comes in two main forms: providing a secure base where a partner can feel protected, and offering a safe haven from which that partner can take on the world. Ideally, both partners should be able to switch fluidly from one role to the other, providing solace or haven, or receiving it as needed. Such reciprocity marks a healthy relationship. We provide a secure base whenever we come to our partner's emotional rescue, by helping them solve a vexing problem, soothing them, or simply being present and listening. Once we feel a relationship offers us a secure base, our energies are freer to tackle challenges. As John Bowlby put it, all of us, from the cradle to the grave, are happiest when life offers us a series of excursions, long or short, from a secure base. Those excursions can be as simple as spending a day at the office or as complex as making a world-class accomplishment. If you think of the acceptance speeches people give for major prizes, they typically include gratitude toward the person who provides them a safe base. This bespeaks the crucial importance of feeling secure and confident for our ability to achieve. Our sense of security and our drive to explore are entwined. The more our partner provides us with a haven and security, Bowlby's theory proposes, the more exploration we can take on, and the more daunting the goal of our explorations, the more we may need to draw on the support of our base to boost our energy and focus, confidence, and courage. These propositions were tested with 116 couples who had been romantically involved for at least 4 years. As predicted, the more a person felt his or her partner to be a dependable home base, the more willing they were to pursue life's opportunities with confidence. Videotapes of the couples discussing each other's goals in life revealed that how they talked also mattered. If one partner was sensitive, warm, and positive during the discussion of the other's goals, the recipient was understandably more confident by the end of the discussion, often raising the bar on their goals. But if a partner was intrusive and controlling, the other partner became more downbeat and insecure about the goal, often ending up cutting back on their aspirations and feeling a lower self-worth. Partners who were controlling were perceived by the other as rude and critical, and their advice was generally rejected. Attempts to take control violate the cardinal rule for providing a secure base. Intervene only when asked to or when it is absolutely necessary. Letting a partner venture forth in his or her own way is a quiet vote of confidence. The more we try to control, the more we tacitly undermine that vote. Intruding hampers exploration. Partner support and attachment styles vary. People who are anxious in their attachments may have trouble relaxing enough to allow space for a partner's explorations, wanting them instead to stay nearby, just as anxious mothers tend to do. Such overly clingy partners may be fine for offering a secure base, but they cannot function as a safe haven. In contrast, avoidant people typically have no trouble letting their partner roam, but are poor at offering a secure base of comfort, and virtually never come to their emotional rescue. Poor Liat. It could have been a scene straight out of the television show Fear Factor. Liat, a university student, had to endure a series of ordeals, each more trying than the one before. She was clearly horrified by her first task, looking at gory pictures of a hideously burned man and a grotesquely injured face. Next, when she had to hold and stroke a rat, Liat was so dismayed that she almost dropped it. Then, instructed to plunge her arm into ice water up to the elbow and keep it there for 30 seconds, she found the pain too intense to keep it immersed for more than 20. Finally, when she next was supposed to reach into a glass terrarium and pet a live tarantula, it was just too much for her. Liat screamed, "I can't go on." Now here's the question. Would you have volunteered to help Liat escape the ordeal by offering to take her place? That very question was asked of fellow students who had volunteered for a study of how anxiety affects compassion, that noble extension of our instinct for caregiving. Their answers reveal that just as attachment styles can skew sexuality, they also lend their distinctive twist to empathy. Mario Mikulincer, an Israeli colleague of Philip Shaver in the research on attachment styles, argues that the innate altruistic impulse that follows from empathy with someone in need can become muddled, suppressed, or overridden when people feel the anxiety of insecure attachment. Through elaborate experiments, Mikulincer has shown that each of the 3 different attachment styles has a distinct impact on the ability to empathize. People who had various attachment styles were asked to watch poor Liat, who was, of course, an experimental Confederate acting the part. The secure people were the most compassionate, both in feeling Liat's distress and in volunteering to take her place. Anxious people, however, were swallowed up by their own distressing reactions and could not bring themselves to come to her rescue. And avoidant people were neither upset nor prone to help. The secure style seems optimal for altruism. Such people readily attune to the distress of others and act to help them. Secure people are more likely than others to be actively caring in their relationships, whether as mothers helping their children, romantic partners offering emotional support to a partner feeling distress, caring for older relatives, or helping out a needy stranger. But anxious people attune with an oversensitivity that can make them all the more upset at another person's suffering, swamped by contagion. While they feel the other's pain, those feelings can intensify into empathy distress, a level of anxiety so strong that they become overwhelmed. Anxious people seem most vulnerable to compassion fatigue, burning out from their own anguish when faced with a relentless parade of others' suffering. Avoidant people find compassion difficult too. They protect themselves against painful emotions by suppressing them, and so, in self-defense, they close themselves off to emotional contagion from others who are suffering. Because they empathize poorly, they rarely help. The one exception seems to be when they might benefit personally in some way by helping. Their occasions of compassion come with a "what's in it for me" flavoring. Caregiving flows most fully when we are feeling secure, possessed of a stable foundation that allows us to feel empathy without being overwhelmed. Feeling cared for frees us to care for others, and when we don't feel cared for, we can't care nearly so well. That insight led Miko Linzer to explore whether simply making people more secure might boost their capacity for caring. Imagine you're reading in your local newspaper about the plight of a woman with 3 young children. She has no husband, no job, and no money. Every day she brings her hungry youngsters to eat at a soup kitchen. Without that meager food, they would have none. They might suffer malnutrition or even die. Would you be willing to donate some food for her once a month? Help her search the want ads for a job? Would you go so far as to accompany her to a job interview? Those very questions were asked of volunteers in another study of compassion by Miko Linzer. In these experiments, the volunteers first underwent an enhancement of their feelings of security. They received a short, 1/50th of a second unconscious exposure to the names of people who made them feel secure, such as the person they liked to talk upsetting things over with. They were also asked to bring these people to mind deliberately by visualizing the faces of these caring figures in their lives. Strikingly, anxious people overcame their empathy distress and their usual reluctance to help. Even this temporary boost allowed them to react like secure people, showing more compassion. A heightened sense of security seems to free up an abundant supply of attention and energy for the needs of others. But avoidant people still fail to empathize and so suppress their altruistic impulse, unless they stood to gain something from it. Their cynical attitude fits the theory that there is no such thing as true altruism, and that compassionate acts always contain within them at least a bit of self-interest, if not selfishness. Miko Linzer suggests that there is a grain of truth in that view, but mainly for people who are avoidant and so do not empathize well in the first place. Of the 3 attachment styles, the secure people were still the most willing among the volunteers to lend a hand. Their compassion appears to be directly proportional to the need they perceive. The greater the pain, the more they help. The low road to compassion. Such empathy, Jaak Panksepp argues, has its roots in the low-road neural system for maternal nurturance, one we share with a wide range of other species. Empathy appears to be a primary response of this system. As every mother knows, her baby's cry has particular potency. Lab studies show that a mother's physiological arousal is distinctly stronger when she hears her own baby crying than when she hears another baby's wails. The baby's ability to elicit in his mother an emotion similar to what he's feeling offers the mother guidance on what the baby needs. This ability of an infant's cries to trigger on-target caregiving, a phenomenon seen not just in mammals but even in birds, suggests that it is a universal template in nature, one with immense and rather obvious benefits for survival. Empathy plays the pivotal role in caregiving, which, after all, centers on responding to the needs of others rather than our own. Compassion, a grand term, in its everyday guise can show as availability, sensitivity, or responsiveness, all signs of good parenting or friendship. And when it comes to a prospective mate, remember, both men and women rate kindness as the #1 trait they seek. Freud noted a striking similarity in the physical intimacy between lovers and that between a mother and her baby. Lovers, like mothers and infants, spend much time gazing into each other's eyes, cuddling, nuzzling, suckling, and kissing, with ample skin-to-skin contact. And in both cases, the contact offers a contented bliss. Sex aside, the neurochemical key to the pleasures of such contact is oxytocin, the molecule of motherly love. Oxytocin, which the human body releases in women during childbirth and nursing as well as during orgasm, chemically triggers the flood of loving feelings that every mother feels towards her baby, and so the primal biochemistry of protection and caregiving. As a mother nurses, oxytocin floods through her body, producing many effects. It induces a flow of milk. It also dilates the blood vessels in the skin around the mammary gland, thereby warming her baby. The mother's blood pressure falls as she feels more relaxed. Along with a sense of peacefulness, she feels more outgoing, wanting to engage with people. The more oxytocin she has, the more sociable she is. Kirsten Uvnas Moberg, a Swedish neuroendocrinologist who has studied oxytocin intensively, contends that this chemical flood occurs whenever we engage in affectionate contact with someone we care for. The neural circuitry for oxytocin intersects with many low-road nodes of the social brain. The benefits of oxytocin seem to emerge in a variety of pleasant social interactions, especially caregiving in all its forms, where people exchange emotional energy. They can actually prime in each other the good feelings that this molecule bestows. Uvnas Moberg suggests that repeated exposures to the people with whom we feel the closest social bonds can condition the release of oxytocin, so that merely being in their presence, or even just thinking about them, may trigger in us a pleasant dose. Small wonder that cubicles and even the most soulless of offices are papered with photos of loved ones. Oxytocin may be a neurochemical key to committed, loving relationships. In one study, it was shown to bond members of one species of prairie vole in lifelong monogamous matches. Voles of another variety who lack this oxytocin release have sex promiscuously and never bond to a partner. In experiments where the hormone was blocked, monogamous voles that had already mated suddenly lost interest in each other. But when the hormone was released in the promiscuous voles that lacked it, they started bonding with each other. In humans, oxytocin may present a catch-22. The very chemistry of long-term love may sometimes suppress the chemistry of lust. The specifics are quite complex, but in one interaction, vasopressin, oxytocin's close cousin, drives down levels of testosterone. In another, testosterone suppresses oxytocin. Still, while the scientific specifics wait to be worked out, testosterone can sometimes enhance oxytocin, suggesting that at least hormonally, passion need not fade with commitment. Social allergies. Suddenly, all you're aware of is that there are too many wet towels on the floor. He's hugging the remote, and he's scratching his back with a fork. Finally, you come face to face with the immutable truth that it's virtually impossible to French kiss a person who takes the new roll of toilet paper and leaves it resting on top of the empty cardboard roll. That litany of complaints signals the blooming of a social allergy, a strong aversion toward a romantic partner's habits that, like a physical allergen, at first contact causes no reaction and would not in most other people, but becomes increasingly sensitized with each exposure. Social allergies typically emerge when a dating couple spend more time together, getting to know each other, warts and all. The social allergy's irritating quality waxes as the inoculating power of romantic idealization wanes. In research among American college students, most social allergies in women developed in reaction to their boyfriend's uncouth or thoughtless behavior, like that toilet paper roll habit. Men, on the other hand, become vexed when their girlfriends seemed self-absorbed or too bossy. Social allergies worsen with repeated exposure. A woman who shrugs off her partner's boorish behaviors at 2 months may find them barely tolerable after a year. These hypersensitivities have consequence only to the extent that they prime anger and distress. The more upset they make a partner, the more likely it is that couple will break up. Psychoanalysts remind us that our desire for the perfect person who will meet every one of our expectations and empathically sense and fulfill our every need is a primal fantasy impossible to achieve. When we learn to accept that no lover or spouse can ever satisfy all the unmet needs we bring from childhood, we can begin to perceive our partners more fully and realistically, rather than seeing them through the lens of our wishes and projections. And neuroscientists add that attachment, caregiving, and sexual desire are but 3 of 7 major neural systems that drive what we want and do. Exploration, which includes learning about the world, and social bonding are among the others. Each of us ranks these basic neural drives in our own way. Some people live to ramble, others to socialize. When it comes to love, though, attachment, caregiving, and sex are typically at the top of the list, in one order or another. John Gottman, a pioneering researcher on emotions and marriages, proposes that the degree to which a partner meets the main needs of the other's dominant neural systems predicts whether their match will last. Gottman, a psychologist at the University of Washington, has become the leading expert on what makes marriages succeed or fail, once coming up with a way to predict with more than 90% accuracy whether a couple would separate within the following 3 years. These days, Gottman argues that when a primary need goes unmet, say for sexual contact or for caring, we feel a steady state of dissatisfaction, one that can manifest as subtly as a vague frustration or as visibly as continual rancor. These needs, when frustrated, fester. The signals of such neural discontent are early warning signs of a union in jeopardy. On the other hand, something rather remarkable tends to happen with couples who live together for decades, finding happiness with each other. Their continual rapport even seems to leave its mark on their faces, which come to resemble each other, apparently a result of the sculpting of facial muscles as they evoke the same emotions over the years. Since each emotion tenses and relaxes a specific set of facial muscles, as partners smile or frown in unison, they strengthen the parallel set of muscles. This gradually molds similar ridges, wrinkles, and lines, making their faces appear more alike. That marvel was revealed in a study where people were shown 2 collections of photos of couples, the first from their wedding, the other taken 25 years later, and were asked which husbands and wives looked most similar to each other. The couple's faces had not only grown more alike, but the greater the facial similarity, the happier they reported being in their marriage. In a sense, as time goes on, the partners in a relationship sculpt each other in subtler ways, reinforcing desirable patterns in each other via countless small interactions. That sculpting, some research suggests, tends to push people toward their partner's ideal version of who they should be. This quiet push to get the love we want has been called the Michelangelo phenomenon, where each partner shapes the other. The sheer amount of positive looping a couple does on any given day or over the years may be the best single barometer of the health of their marriage. Consider a study of dating couples on the verge of marriage, who agreed to undergo a fine-grained analysis of their interaction patterns during disagreements. The couples returned to the lab for several follow-up sessions over the course of 5 years. Their interactions during that first session before marriage predicted surprisingly much about the course of their relationship over the years. Understandably, negative looping boded poorly. The less satisfied couples tended to match their emotions the most closely during hostile arguments. The more negative the dating partners became during this early disagreement, the less stable their match turned out to be. Particularly damaging were expressions of disgust or contempt. Contempt escalates negativity beyond mere criticism, often taking the form of an outright insult, delivered as though to someone on a lesser plane. With a partner's contempt comes the message that the other is unworthy of empathy, let alone love. Such toxic loops become all the worse when spouses have accurate empathy. They know exactly the distress the other feels but don't care enough to help. As one seasoned divorce lawyer put it, indifference, not caring about or even paying attention to your mate, is one of the worst forms of cruelty in a marriage. Also hurtful was a pattern where one disgruntlement triggered another, anger begetting hurt and sadness, with defiant challenges, "How can you say that?" and partners interrupting each other before the other could finish speaking. Those patterns most strongly predicted the couple would break up, whether before or after marrying. Most broke up within a year and a half after their first session in the study. As John Gottman told me, In dating couples, the most important predictor of whether the relationship will last is how many good feelings the couple shares. In marriages, it's how well the couple can handle their conflicts. And in the later years of a long marriage, it's again how many good feelings the couple shares. As husbands and wives in their 60s discuss something they enjoy, measures of their physiology show that they both become progressively more cheerful as the conversation continues. But for couples in their 40s, their physiology rises to fewer peaks of resonance. That suggests why satisfied couples in their 60s are more openly affectionate with each other than are those in middle age. From his exhaustive studies of married couples, Gottman has derived a deceptively simple measure. The ratio of toxic to nourishing moments a couple has together has remarkable predictive power. A 5-to-1 ratio, far more positive moments than negative, indicates that a couple has a sound emotional bank account and a robust relationship that is almost certain to thrive long term. That ratio may predict more than just relationship longevity. It may also offer a reading of how physically healthy the partners will be. As we shall see, our relationships themselves form environments that can turn certain genes on or off. Suddenly, our intimate relations have to be seen in an entirely new light. The invisible web of connectedness bestows surprising biological consequences on our closest human ties. Part 5. Healthy Connections. Chapter 16. Stress is social. Just a week before their wedding, the Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy, then 34, shared his personal diary with his fiancée Sonia, just 17. She was crushed to learn from its pages of Leo's profligate and conflicted sexual history, including a passionate affair with a local woman who had borne him an illegitimate child. Sonia then wrote in her own diary, "He loves to torment me and see me weep. What is he doing to me? Little by little, I shall withdraw completely from him and poison his life." This she resolved even as the preparations for their marriage were underway. That inauspicious beginning was the emotional prelude to a 48-year marriage. The Tolstoys' tumultuous and epic marital battle was punctuated by lengthy truces that saw Sonia give birth to 13 children and dutifully decode and recopy from Leo's messy handwriting neat versions of 21,000 manuscript pages for his novels, including War and Peace and Anna Karenina. Yet, despite her devoted service during those years, Leo wrote in his diary of Sonia, "Her unfairness and quiet egotism frighten and torment me." And Sonia counted in her diary, writing of Leo, "How can one love an insect that never stops stinging?" By midlife, their marriage, as recorded in their private journals, seemed to have disintegrated into an unbearable hell for both of them, living as enemies in the same household. Toward the end of their lives, and shortly before Leo died while fleeing his troubled home in the middle of the night, Sonia wrote, "Every day there are fresh blows that scorch my heart. And these scorching blows," she added, "shorten my life." Can Sonia have been right? Does such a stormy relationship shorten life? We certainly can't prove it from the case of the Tolstoys. Leo lived to be 82, and Sonia lived for 9 years after he died, to 74. How soft epigenetic factors like our relationships affect our health has been an elusive scientific question. Whether they do at all, and to what degree, can best be answered by looking at thousands of people over many years. Some influential studies seem to suggest that the sheer number of other people in one's life predicts better health, but they miss the point. It is not the quantity, but the quality that counts. Far more telling for our health than the absolute number of social ties we have may be the emotional tone of our relationships. As the Tolstoys remind us, relationships can as readily be sources of angst as of joy. On the upside, the feeling that the people in one's life are emotionally supportive has a positive health impact. This link shows itself most powerfully in people whose condition is already fragile. For instance, in a study of elderly people hospitalized for congestive heart failure, those who had no one to rely on for emotional support were 3 times more likely to have another episode requiring a return to the hospital than were those with warm relationships. Love seemingly can make a medical difference. Among men getting angiography as part of treatment for coronary heart disease, those whose loved ones were reportedly least supportive had about 40% more blockage than those who reported having the warmest connections. Conversely, data from a number of large epidemiological studies suggest that toxic relationships are as major a risk factor for disease and death as are smoking, high blood pressure or cholesterol, obesity, and physical inactivity. Relationships cut two ways. They can either buffer us from illness or intensify the ravages of aging and disease. To be sure, relationships alone tell only part of the story. Other risk factors, from genetic susceptibility to smoking, all play their part, but the data put our relationships squarely among those risk factors. And now, with the social brain as the missing biological link, medical science has begun to detail the biological pathways through which others get under our skin, for better or worse. A war of all against all. Hobbes was the name given to a macho male baboon by the researchers who observed him while he invaded a troop living in the jungles of Kenya. In the grim spirit of his namesake, the 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who wrote that beneath the veneer of civilization, life is nasty, brutish, and short, this baboon arrived primed to fight tooth and claw to reach the top of the group hierarchy. The impact of Hobbes on the other males was measured by taking samples of cortisol from their blood, and it became clear that his raw aggression rippled through the endocrine systems of the entire group. Under stress, the adrenal glands release cortisol, one of the hormones the body mobilizes in an emergency. These hormones have widespread effects in the body, including many that are adaptive in the short term for healing bodily injuries. Ordinarily, we need a moderate level of cortisol, which acts as a biological fuel for our metabolism and helps regulate the immune system. But if our cortisol levels remain too high for prolonged periods, the body pays a price in ill health. The chronic secretion of cortisol and related hormones are at play in exacerbating diabetes and hypertension, and even destroying neurons in the hippocampus, harming memory. Even as cortisol shuts down the hippocampus, it also stokes the amygdala, stimulating the growth of dendrites in that site for fear. In addition, heightened cortisol blunts the ability of the key areas in the prefrontal cortex to regulate the signals of fear coming from the amygdala. The combined neural impact of too much cortisol is threefold. The amygdala circuitry goes on a rampage, and the prefrontal area fails to modulate signals from the overreacting amygdala. The result? The amygdala runs rampant, driving fear, while the hippocampus mistakenly perceives too many triggers for that fear. In monkeys, the brain remains ever vigilant for signs of a Hobbes-like stranger. In humans, that condition of vigilance and overreactivity has been called post-traumatic stress disorder.